I'm John Lorden, and I've been looking into mysterious occurrences on YouTube since 2015. Today, joining me are a few friends from Uncovered.com.
I'm Rachel Roslett, a forensic psychologist and head of case research and data at Uncovered.
I'm Andrea Cipriano. I'm also a forensic psychologist, and I'm a case researcher and content creator at Uncovered.
Welcome back to LordanArts Uncovered. And today, we're looking into the case of 20-year-old Elaine Park, who vanished into thin air back in 2017. She was last seen in the early morning hours of Saturday, January 28th in Calabasas, California. Soon after, her car was found parked along the Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu. Could surveillance footage of Elaine leaving her boyfriend's house hold important clues? We're going to try to answer that here today. Calabasas, California is a beautiful location that I spent a number of years living in. It's considered a great area for families since both the public and private schools are fantastic. The skies are sunny all year round, and the dry heat can make the area feel like a never-ending vacation, and it's a short drive to Malibu. Violent crime rates in the area are nearly 48% below the national average. However, it has had a few mysteries that have grabbed the public's attention along the years. Some Calabasas neighborhoods include gated communities that celebrities call home, with multi-million-dollar homes dotting the mountain ridges. One gated community gives us the last views of Elaine Park. Let's turn it over to our case experts to learn more. Rachel, Andrea, what can you tell us about Elaine, and how does this timeline come together?
Elaine Park is an outgoing, artistic, and popular musician and actress within her community. Elaine's family says that she loves pop culture, fashion, musical theater, and dancing on the high school cheerleading squad. She spent time working in LA and even earned herself a few small roles in TV shows and movies like Desperate Housewives, ER, Mad TV, Role Models, and Crazy Stupid Love. She is described as being spunky, energetic, popular, intelligent, and kind.
Her spunk didn't just stop at her personality, but it translated into her body as well. Elaine was edgy. She was rarely ever seen without dramatic cat eye makeup or fun piercings in her ears and nose. Even though she was only 20 years old, Elaine's body became a canvas for self-expression with several tattoos. She had a dagger and flowers on her right arm, a red traditional rose on her left shoulder, and a cow skull and moth on her left arm.
Despite her edgy style and her outgoing nature, Elaine, like everyone, had a private side to her personal life that only a few people around her and were close to her knew. In 2016, her parents got divorced while Elaine was still a young adult. So she moved in with her mother to a tiny town called La Crescenta, just north of Los Angeles. Around that same time, Elaine quietly began experiencing some bouts of depression. But she was doing everything she could do to stay active with her friends. And we think it's worth noting that friends and family of Elaine say she wasn't considering taking her own life and never talked about self-harm.
After graduating high school, Elaine enrolled at Pierce College in Woodland Hills, California. By all accounts, Elaine had no trouble making friends, and she had a pretty big friend group. But for an unknown reason, Elaine suddenly stopped attending classes in January of 2017. This is just weeks before she would vanish. She had recently been laid off from her restaurant job, and with that as well, it's unknown what transpired to result in her job termination.
Okay, so you've both mentioned that she had a big circle of friends. Was there any person in particular that kind of sticks out, at least related to this investigation?
A name that comes up frequently in her case is that of her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Divine Compare. Divine is the son of a successful Hollywood businessman, Shakim Compare. The Compare family had been or is in the entertainment industry since 1995, and in 2013, Shakim landed a big deal with Netflix, significantly bolstering the family's wealth that Divine, like many young adults, would want to show off to his friends.
So while Elaine was in college in 2016, she met and started dating Divine. News reports note that Elaine would frequently drive to the Compare family home in a beautiful gated community in Calabasas. Divine still lived with his parents at the time, But Elaine frequently spent the night at their house without concern from either Divine or Elaine's parents. After all, both Elaine and Divine were young 20-somethings.
So you mentioned that their relationship is on again, off again. Could you find any particular reasons for this type of turbulence in their relationship?
We didn't find anything of importance. Rosemarie Wheeler, a friend of the family who knew Elaine and who has become the case advocate, says many people just simply saw that Elaine and Divine were probably better as friends. With that, it's important to share that Elaine and Divine were in fact actively dating when she disappeared, and Divine was cleared by law enforcement as a suspect.
This brings us to Friday, January 27th of 2017, the night before Elaine disappeared. Elaine left her mother's home to go visit Divine at his parents' house in Calabasas. Elaine pulls into the driveway during the 7 o'clock hour that night. After some time, the pair decided to go see a movie at an AMC in the Promenade in Woodland Hills, California. And they take an Uber there just after 10 p.m. for a 10:45 showing. When the movie ends, it's already after midnight, so they take an Uber back to Divine's home, where their night ends around 1:30 in the morning.
So the Compare family had camera surveillance on their driveway, and there's footage of the two leaving and coming home. That's been released to the public. So let's go ahead and watch that surveillance footage now and just see what we can see in this. Now, first of all, the timestamp on this is wrong. It's off by 3 hours. So this is actually 10:19 that we're looking at. We can see her walking out.
She seems to have a little bounce in her step. It all seems very normal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I would think at this point, the only question is, where is he? I sped up the time here because she waits out there for about a minute and a half. And we can see a car starting to pull up.
Mm-hmm. So it seems that she appears to be waiting for the Uber that they called for.
Yeah. And just so everyone that's watching knows, this has been modified by me. The contrast has been juiced up. It's been sharpened, and I'm doing all these zooms. This isn't someone that's watching and controlling the cameras. I've done all these after the fact.
One thing that I noted is there were other cars behind that Uber, so it's not as if this was a area where there wasn't much traffic going on.
Mm-hmm.
She goes back to get Divine, it appears.
Yeah. And, I mean, if anything, it looks a little distant, just like how much space is between them. Like she's not waiting for him. I don't know. Like it might be a big deal.
Speaking from a woman's perspective, I'd be like, dude, where are you? Let's go.
Yeah.
I know. The internal dialogue that I had watching this was almost like he was like still putting his shoes on or something. And she said, okay, I'm going to go wait outside to make sure that the Uber gets to this house in the community. When you do look at, the gated community on satellite, this is the last house at the end of the street. Okay. So she's probably just out there just trying to make sure that the car is coming her way. And then when she does get confirmation that's the Uber, that's when she kind of walks back to get him. And by then he's done theoretically like putting on his shoes or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And
this is a great surveillance footage to be this clear.
All right. So this is them coming back. Remember, the timestamp's wrong. This is 1:09 a.m.
What's interesting is you kind of see the car do like a little bit of a swoop to get in front of the house. And again, that's because this is the end of the street. So they're kind of in like their own little cul-de-sac.
Got it. You can just make out a couple of the figures on the other side of that bush there. And there they are.
Yeah, to me, this just looks like a tired stroll back into the house at 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
She does have a little unique pep to her step. I mean, they all seemed very normal.
Yeah, now, like when you release footage like this publicly, there's a lot of online conjecture and stuff that happens, and people start looking into things and seeing it this way. Are you guys hearing anything in terms of this footage or what people are seeing in it? Like what type of stuff did you bump into with that?
Yeah. I mean, throughout like all the footage that we'll see throughout this case, there's a lot of online discussion about whether they see other cars in the background and, stuff like that. And ultimately, it's very possible that there were other cars in the background because again, this wasn't the only house in this gated community. And the kind of wall that we even see in the video, that's even a gate to the house itself. So it's, that's part of the visibility issue. But again, other people live here. So
yeah,
that's just something to note.
And we also saw speculation about they weren't holding hands. Should they be holding hands? And gosh, we just don't know what kind of people these are. It's late in the morning. They may just want to go to bed. It doesn't mean anything negative that they were or were not holding hands.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Well, and quite honestly, with how the internet is, I'm sure there's comments out there too about, did you guys see the floating orbs in front of the camera, or the alien spaceship in the background? I'm sure it goes every which way with this case. But so what happens the next morning?
So the next morning, which was Saturday, January 28th, Elaine was supposed to go back to her mother's house at some point. Since she's 20, it wasn't uncommon for her to be out and about and spend the night elsewhere. So when her mother doesn't hear from her first thing in the morning, she's not incredibly concerned. As the day goes on, she does send a few more text messages, and Elaine never responds. And that is very uncharacteristic of her.
So then on Sunday, the 29th, things get progressively more tense. Elaine's mother, Susan, states that panic really started to set in when she called Elaine's cell phone. And for whatever reason, sometimes it would ring 2 or 3 times before stopping, but other times it would go straight to voicemail. So that was kind of sporadic. It wasn't that like her phone was completely dead. And it's around this time that Susan contacts Divine to ask him where Elaine was. And he says that Elaine left in a hurry at 6 a.m. Saturday. So Divine is actually shocked to hear that she didn't make it back to the house. And the final red flag that something was wrong was that all of Elaine's social media accounts were quiet. And if you remember the importance of keeping your Snapchat streak back in 2017, you'd know how serious it was for someone to suddenly stop being online, especially when they're in their 20s.
So this brings us to January 30th, 2017, which is the Monday after this weekend. And Elaine is officially reported missing to the Glendale Police Department. Immediately, officers go out to Calabasas to speak with Divine. He gives his account of what happened over the past few days and says that after he and Elaine got back from the movie, that night took an unexpected turn. Divine told police that around 5 a.m., Elaine woke up having some sort of episode where she began to jump up and down, was dancing, and saying she wanted to leave. Some have described it as a panic attack, but really none of Elaine's supposed symptoms fit with the criteria that we think about as a panic attack.
Yeah, no, that doesn't sound like a panic attack necessarily. I mean, unfortunately, I've had a few in my life, and yeah, it's much more about sweaty palms, vision closing in some instances. Yeah, it's not.
You feel like you're going to die.
Yeah.
It has been my experience. Like you're
Yes.
not sure what's happening to you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, we know the way that the DSM-5 categorizes it. Panic attacks are, typically when someone, like you guys were both saying, when you feel weak, faint, dizzy, and overall, you're really disoriented. So sometimes people can also really feel nauseated and breathless. But what we hear about what Divine is saying about her jumping up and down, dancing, even saying that she wants to leave, it's just a little bit different. And it sounds more like a hypomanic episode where someone is abnormally energetic and they have a decreased need for sleep.
Did Elaine have a history of either panic attacks or hypomanic episodes?
According to her family, they say they have not seen her experiencing anything like that. So we can't fully rule it out, especially because both panic attacks and hypomanic episodes are not unusual for someone with depression. But we want to be clear that we're not in any way attempting to diagnose what happened to Elaine. I mean, that is impossible for us to do with this little information. And we know that not everybody experiences things exactly the same way as someone else might. We're just taking the facts of what we heard and applying some context around them.
One more question. For hypomanic episodes in particular, can they be exacerbated by narcotics?
I mean, most any time your mental state can be exacerbated by narcotics. If you think about someone who has bipolar with depressive episodes and manic episodes, sometimes you can trigger a manic episode with narcotics. So in similar ways, a hypomanic episode could be triggered with narcotics, but essentially you would have to, do a toxicology report.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
And it's not unusual for people that experience things like this to try to self-treat, especially when they don't know what's going on. So if she was experiencing something that scared her, she may have tried to treat it with narcotics too.
Yeah. And even with that, it was making me think too, there's been studies that have come out about bipolar where even hypomanic episodes and manic episodes could be triggered with too much caffeine. So really it's honestly anything. And, with that too, I think it's also more likely that Divine would have seen Elaine acting strangely, and maybe he just didn't know what to call it other than a panic attack, because that's in everybody's vernacular. Most people who don't study psychology, they've probably never heard of a hypomanic episode. So this could just be a case of mischaracterizing her behavior, and then that mischaracterization kind of switches the way that the media talks about this case.
Really, really good insight there. Yeah. Because we have to remember that we're getting this information through the lens of what he understands and what he's seeing. Really, really good. What does Elaine do next here?
So after she had been awake for a bit of time, Elaine packed up her things. Divine says she didn't explain herself as to why she got up and left so suddenly, but she left around 6 a.m. and surveillance footage catches her walking towards her 2015 Honda Civic. We can see her getting into the car and driving away from the house. There's even a license plate reader camera in that gated community that logs that her car left the community approximately 10 minutes later. And this is the last time that Elaine Park is seen on camera.
So again, we have footage from both of those sources, and both of these sources don't have correct timestamps. So remember, this is now 6:04. Once again, from the front of the house, we can see the sun is starting to crest over that hill in the background there. She's exiting her. It doesn't look like she has anything in her right arm, but her left arm looks like she's carrying a bag, right?
Yeah, like a tote or a bigger purse.
It's not like she's rushing out. Maybe a little bit faster than she was walking the night before, but she has a very distinct peppy walk, and she was walking the same way.
Yeah. So the timing, and once again, these cameras are so messed up. This one it's supposed to be 6:14 at this time. So more than 10 minutes if the minutes are right, but we don't know that they are. Somewhere in the 10 to 15 minute range, which, does she go to her car and sit in it for a minute and kind of, who knows?
Sure.
Texts, checks online.
Plug in my phone, put it up on my dash. Yeah.
Yeah, but I know online I'm seeing that there's a lot of conversation around that time gap. And of course, when people are looking for opportunities for something to have happened to her, people are looking at that time gap in particular and saying, well, we can't account for what's happening between there and when the plate reader actually has her leaving. Not to mention that the plate reader footage you guys saw, it's very, very dark. I mean, it's a great shot of the plate, but it's obviously made to capture that. We can't see what's actually going on inside the vehicle. So
yeah, I think a lot of times the simplest explanation is the best. And we see her on camera leaving. She doesn't seem to be running away or anything. Climbs in her car. I mean, conceivably 10 to 15 minutes later, after she's done some adjustment, she's leaving. That seems perfectly reasonable to me, and we shouldn't assume that anything nefarious happened there.
Well, and keep in mind the statistics for crime in this area, on top of it being
Right?
in a gated community. And I can tell you, after living there,
Yes.
like there would be so many police cars, like just sitting around. Like my wife and I would talk about it and just be like, aren't there places where we could move these funds that actually need these cop cars? Because I mean, like we lived in a little kind of quiet cul-de-sac end as well. And, we'd regularly see like 2 police cars that were just stationed there, just mounted around there. And it's like, what are these doing here? Like do we have an
Right.
issue where we need this type of police presence? So yeah, I think those stories, I understand why people are trying to understand this and looking at those gaps and saying, okay, something could have potentially happened here. I agree. There's some possibility that something could have happened there, but based on the information that we had, this looks very routine. They went to a movie. They came home from the movie. We're hearing that something odd did happen in the house. She acted in some way where Divine didn't understand what was really going on. But when she leaves, she's not running. She's not kicking things. There's not some kind of big emotional angle that we can at least get from the footage. She gets in her car and she winds up leaving is at least what we can string together. But
Right.
so where does this investigation go from here? Where does it take them next?
So the police start with a thorough search of the Compare family home, and they don't find any evidence that points to Divine. Investigators also spoke to both of the Uber drivers to see if there was something of interest there. But both of them, and they independently took this pair to and from the movies, said that Elaine and Divine seemed, quote, very normal, that they were very happy and were having a good time. So that seems to support Divine's account of what was happening. Police then quickly ruled Divine out as a suspect. They also speak with all of Elaine's friends from high school and from college. They were all very cooperative with the investigation. And they really couldn't think of any other people of interest or any new leads that they could give to law enforcement.
So 5 days later, on February 2nd, Elaine's car was found on the 26,000 block of the Pacific Coast Highway, just south of Corral Canyon Road in Malibu. Essentially, her car was parked just steps away from the sandy beach, and the doors to her car were left unlocked. The keys were in the ignition on the on position, so the battery was dead. Authorities found Elaine's iPhone 7, her older broken iPhone 6, her driver's license, her laptop, a black backpack, a blue duffel bag, all of her makeup, and $37 in cash laying out on the backseat.
Rosemarie, who again is the family advocate, says she's seen images of the car and the way that the police discovered it. And she thought it was strange that all of the items were sort of neatly stacked in the car as if someone had placed them about after the car was parked. She said it was also completely uncharacteristic of Elaine to leave cash in plain view in her car in the back seat. What's also strange about the items in Elaine's car is that they were all immediately released to the family without law enforcement processing the contents at a crime lab.
So even though the items were given to Elaine's family, her car was taken to a forensic processing location, and the experts working on the car were unable to conclude whether Elaine had driven the car to the location where it was found, or whether she was in the car when it was abandoned. Strangely enough, Elaine's friends and family say that the Malibu beach was never incredibly interesting to Elaine and that she wouldn't ever go out of her way to visit.
Yeah, I mean, for sites that you're going to go to off of Pacific Coast Highway, like if you want to go check something out, you're going to go to Santa Monica or you're going to go to Venice or something. As a matter of fact, one of the pictures of her is her hanging out at Venice. But for that part of Malibu, like there's not a whole lot there unless like you're into surfing, couple of nice little kind of restaurants, like, a breakfast spot or something. Like it's kind of the direction that she's going actually is troublesome to me because it's pretty much exactly the opposite direction of her heading home.
Hmm.
So it just makes you wonder what's the motivation for her heading in that particular direction. Why was her car found in Malibu? And of course, in that strange condition. The pile of things in the back, like it's got my brain going down. Well, I know that she had just stopped taking her classes. I know that that job didn't work out. Did she grab her things from a locker at work and carry them out? It just seems like a pile of things that was somewhere else that she moved to the back of her car. But let's.
Well,
Yep.
yeah, the odd thing that I noticed was that she said they were neatly stacked. And as we look at the route here in just a second, it doesn't seem to me that had to have taken place, if that was the way that the items were, it had to have taken place when she parked the car, because I don't think you could drive the windy route that she would have taken down to that beach and had items neatly stacked in the backseat of your car.
Yeah. Yeah. Las Virgenes is definitely pretty windy. And I don't know what particular part of Calabasas, considering where they went to the movies over at the AMC Promenade. Like there's these different channels and Mulholland and stuff. They might be a little farther east than is showing up here. This is like the center of Calabasas that's showing up. But likely at some point, even if she was coming off one of these other roads, she probably ran into Las Virgenes at some point to take that the rest of the way down. But this drive, from the center of Calabasas to where her car would be found, only about 16 miles, approximately 26 minutes, according to that. The other thing I get concerned about with this case is just the terrain out there can be really, really rough. You guys have probably heard of another case that happened in this area, which is the Matrice Richardson case. Unfortunately, her remains found in that case, but kind of similar circumstances. She's
They're
seen
hauntingly,
somewhere.
yeah, it's hauntingly similar, I think.
Yeah, she's seen somewhere. She's acting a little off. Her vehicle's found. No one knows where she is. But despite the fact that this is so close to the beach, this place can get really hot. It can get really dry, as you can see in this here. So there's this, and you have wildlife out there. You've got bobcats. You've got coyotes. So there's a lot of kind of dangerous things out here for an area that most people would think like, oh, Malibu, like, isn't that a vacation spot or something like that? So yeah, her vehicle found over here.
I believe we saw that there was hiking trails across the road from where her car was found.
Yeah, there is. And as a matter of fact, they would become part of a search effort. But yeah, there's hiking trails. And even like this is Corral Canyon Loop. But you can see, even with that being designated like a main hiking trail, there's all kinds of little offshoots. And for someone that isn't familiar, like you could wind up in real trouble out here. You can get way off track very, very easily out here. So yeah, her vehicle's it's close to this trailer home area, the RV park, and hiking trails.
For what we could find from the research, I think it's seems to be a real mystery about whether her car was there the entire time, whether it showed up some days later. I think we'll hear later on that they're even offering rewards for photos around that time. It seems unclear whether her car stayed there the whole time or whether it got there at a later date.
Yeah, so the description we're getting on where she was living with her mother, like I said, opposite direction, very far east of here and just a touch north as well. So like she literally went the exact opposite direction of heading home, which is why. Where else is she heading to out here, especially if her family's saying that she doesn't have any interests in that area?
I think also knowing that she's a young adult and left her phone in the car. I mean, no one does that anymore, which I think is interesting. I read in another article that the only item that they didn't find or were surprised not to find was Elaine. She always wore a necklace that had a little E in it. And so that wasn't in the car. So we're assuming that that's still on her person. But, yeah, again, like the phone thing to me is super interesting. And the rest of it, just like you said, John, the clothes and the duffel bags, that could just be stuff that she had in her car, especially if she's driving to Divine's home a lot and staying over. You pack an overnight bag, just extra stuff just to have with you.
Yeah, and I do want to point that out too, that these areas, they might look like, oh, it's just over there. But actually living in this area, like the amount of traffic that you can get, the 101 and the 405, this is like one of the worst highway interchanges in the world for traffic. And you pretty much don't have a choice. Like you have to use the 101 to get from where she was living into Calabasas to see him. That, like during rush hour, very easily an hour, could be an hour and a half even. Like I know it doesn't look that far, but there's also an important consideration with that in that somehow Glendale PD winds up heading this investigation for some reason. And just the travel distance, it's really not practical that they could have been effective with that type of investigation. But let's go ahead and continue with you guys. So starting with these challenges, really limited information, and I wish she would have taken the phone with her. These cases always hit me with that. How do detectives try to move forward from here?
So immediately after her car was found, authorities conducted searches of Corral Canyon Park and the nearby coastline. They had 4 bloodhounds and cadaver dogs, but none of them alerted to anything. They couldn't even pick up Elaine's scent. Divers also searched the water, but they did not find anything. Unfortunately, the searches lasted only a day or so before ending, and we can't find a reason for that in our research, and that seems highly unusual to conclude it so quickly.
Would cadaver dogs even work a day in? I don't even know that that's a good approach just in terms of the science of it, but okay. Wow.
We read some articles where they started with the premise that it was someone who had ended her own life. So that may have been a reflection of their thinking from the beginning that they were looking for a body rather than a live person.
Right. I mean, what if there was an accident situation? What if she did go off into the trails, hurt herself, and was still alive, still clinging on to life? I mean, I know that they had bloodhounds, and obviously they've got a lot of material in her car. They should have been able to get a scent off of that to follow.
I think that's really interesting. No scent at all. So, yeah, that was interesting to me.
Yeah.
So even with that, surprisingly, just over a month after Elaine's car was found, officials with the Glendale Police Department announced on March 7th of 2017 that they have exhausted all leads in Elaine's case. And they said that they would continue with the investigation, but that they didn't have anywhere else to turn.
The LA County Sheriff's Office heard this news, and they essentially say that's unacceptable to leave a case like that. So on March 11th, really just 4 days later, the Sheriff's Office conducts a search above the Pacific Coast Highway where Elaine's car was found with a highly specialized and technologically advanced drone. Elaine's mother, Susan, says that they found some articles of clothing, but they don't know whether they belong to Elaine or not.
And as the months go by, Susan grows more restless with the Glendale Police Department. So on September 12th of 2017, she formally asks the LA County Board of Supervisors to have her daughter's case transferred to the LA County Sheriff's Department because she feels that the Glendale police have, quote, not been doing nearly enough to investigate.
And I believe it. Like what this is such a tough case because there's no leads that are really going anywhere, like if there was a violent crime aspect to this case, you would think, I mean, the stats talk to us about this. We know that it would be someone that was close to her. Most likely. And they've ruled out Divine. So, not to mention we have footage, and you can see it's pretty clear in the footage. She's leaving on her own. Not to say that there isn't a possibility of something else happening after that. There certainly is. And not to say there isn't a possibility of it being a stranger. There certainly is. But we're not getting any indicator of that. We know that they've processed the car forensically. And it's interesting that the way you guys said it was that they couldn't really validate or verify that she had driven the car to that point. But I think we can also infer from that they also didn't find any material in there to make them think that someone else had driven it. So it's just this kind of, in terms of leads, and then considering the physical distance that we're talking about from Glendale to where her car has been found and where search efforts should be mounted. Search efforts, which by the way, in that terrain can be really, really tricky. Like, I don't know that it's the type of terrain where you would want to get 100 volunteers out there. It's probably more like, I mean, I can't count the number of times that I saw search and rescue helicopters flying over that area. It would be a more serious effort than that. Or a more professional effort, I think is the better way to say it. That would be needed so that people wouldn't be hurting themselves and adding to the tragedy here.
It feels like, based on your experience, John, with the area, it feels like there were some assumptions made about what happened to Elaine from the jump.
Yeah.
And the investigation then followed that idea or that theory to the exclusion of other ideas.
Yeah. But it's tough because we don't have any of those strong indicators to point to, hey, we found footprints where her car was that were a men's size 12. Like, that would just throw things into a whole bit of a different category. So yeah, I get it. And I get where the family is frustrated, and I get where I don't know why Glendale gets assigned as the lead detectives on this, considering where her car is found, where she's last seen, and even the fact that, she's staying with her boyfriend. She's spending the night out there. Does she live back over here? Yes. But I mean, come on. I'm kind of glad that the family pushed for having the LA County sheriffs take it.
I think jurisdiction gets confusing we know it does, but, do you report the person missing where they went missing at? So in this case, Calabasas or Malibu, or do you report the person missing to the town that they were living in? And right. I think it can vary. And so that probably is also contributing to the complications of this case.
Between the three people sitting here talking right now, we've looked into hundreds of cases individually, and we don't know the answer. We don't know, because it does vary. Like, you'll get in certain places where they're like, oh, we're not going to take that missing person's report because they didn't live here. You have other instances where it's like, no, we're not going to take that missing person's report because they didn't go missing from here. Yeah, it's really nutty that we can't get that straightened out and make a process that everyone can agree on with that. Oh.
I'm just continually struck by because I personally have looked into Mitrice Richardson's case a lot. It's very tragic, and the similarities between the two cases are overwhelming. Not that I'm implying there's any sort of serial predator or anything, but with Mitrice's case, it seems pretty clear that she was having some sort of psychological break that night. She'd had a history, though, of struggles. With Elaine, she does have some triggering events, like why did she drop out of school? She lost her job. But other than that, she doesn't really appear to have a history like Mitrice did, where you could say, okay, it seems like this is more of a possibility here. So that's the one thing that I think is different about this one.
I mean, even with those considerations, like, she's someone that was into acting and into art. She's dating the son of a producer. This guy has more credits than I could count at this point. Like, and not just film credits, tons of television credits. Like, he is like, if he couldn't open a door to get her a little role here or there, like absolutely that was in play. So, you know, her dropping the classes at Pierce College, probably
Mm-hmm.
not the biggest thing in the world, being perfectly
Sure.
honest.
Sure.
Especially if her heart was really into, you know, pursuing acting.
Yeah.
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 So yeah,
Very
it's,
good point.
you know, I just want to point out that while I cover a lot of cases that involve mental illness, based on the way this case has been investigated and how her depression is being brought up regularly, especially in the context and seemingly the assumption by law enforcement that she may have harmed herself, I just want to run it by both of you ladies because I know your background in education. How do you think factors around mental illness should come into play with an investigation like this? Do you think that's not enough for police to say, hey, we think we know what happened in this situation and we're not going to send out more resources?
I think I personally am not seeing enough here to say, oh, that's the lead I'm going to go down first. From a victimology perspective, which is what my specialization is, of course, you want to know these things. You want to know that because it gives you the full context of a person. But to jump on that and make that the narrative, I think we're always doing someone a disservice. You should pursue all narratives. You should pursue all leads and not just to the exclusion of the other. I mean, I hear she had depression, but that's not an uncommon thing. And many people manage it just fine. So I don't agree with the way that it's been brought to the forefront for this case. That was just one piece of her puzzle.
Absolutely. I think about how when anybody is diagnosed with any form of mental illness, in many ways, especially with the media, that's all they ever focus on. And that's all somebody would ever be categorized under. And so I think that was part of what happened possibly in Elaine's case. I think there's also differences between clinical depression and depression that comes up based out of experience. And what we learned is that Elaine didn't really start to feel any symptoms of depression until after her parents' divorce a year prior to this. Obviously, a big change of leaving high school, going into college, having to, there's a lot of different life changes that are happening there. So having situational depression is very likely. And so with that, again, it's still that idea that should that be the sole focus of the investigation? Not with anything, because you're just going to pigeonhole yourself into one ending and then never fully investigate other options.
Yeah, I think we all, in terms of media, social media, and I think even consumers of true crime content, I think we need to really try to fight that urge of like, oh, I'm going to figure this one out. Like it's kind of like the Law and Order effect, Like when I was watching those episodes, like in the first 5 minutes, I'm like, okay, it's this guy. Like I know it right off the bat. And then if I'm right at the end, I'm patting myself on the back. If I'm wrong at the end, I somehow forget about that along the way. So it's one of those things where I feel like everyone's kind of pushing, we're not trying to call a football game here. Like this is really about trying to find something tangible that's going to help this family process whatever the reality of that situation is. And I think that's where the family's been let down with this one.
Yeah. And I think us as media or regular people, we like to have those answers because this is scary. Yeah. This is scary that your daughter could just disappear one morning. And if we can point to, oh, it was depression or, oh, it was this thing, then it allows us to feel okay about it. It allows us to distance ourselves from that crime so we're not as scared. But like you said, John, we really need to hold back from doing those things. I know we all want answers, so it's a less scary situation to us. But to make depression the narrative here doesn't, really help the investigation at all.
Oh, and I don't think depression is the only, kind of boogeyman that's been brought up in this case either. After going through this and looking at the footage, I don't really have any questions about what happened at the compare home. Like, I think it's pretty clear, she left. Yeah, something strange happened in there. I think the only question I would have around that is, Could that have been something that was exacerbated by narcotics in some way? But even if it was, that's not to point blame or, to try to create that boogeyman. I'm just trying to understand the situation better for what happened in that episode. I'm way more concerned about what happens after she leaves. Why is she going off in that direction?
Exactly.
Does she encounter anybody? Is there some other big part of this story that we're missing? Because there's a lot of potential for that. And then, of course, ultimately, where does she wind up? So where exactly does this case stand today?
Elaine's case is at a point where investigators could benefit from the public's help. Jaden Brandt, a private investigator, started a tips and rewards campaign urging the public to come forward with any pictures or videos of parked cars on the Pacific Coast Highway where Elaine would have presumably parked her car. Different monetary value rewards have been offered depending on what pictures you have. So ones that feature her car when it would have been closest to the highway would receive the most money. Jaden added that any photo that provides evidence as to what happened to Elaine will receive a $50,000 reward.
I really appreciate the approach there. Like that's a different thing. I haven't heard of that being used before. Like we want every photo of this area at this time frame, and even if you recognize something in it or not, send it to us and we're going to give you some money in some way. Wow. That's really
And just to remind people of the dates, this is going to be from when she left on Saturday, January 28th, to when her car was found. I believe it was April 5th. So if you were, April 2nd. So if you were in the area during that time and you took photos, that's what this group is looking for.
I also saw at ElaineParkMissing.com that there's an additional $275,000 in reward money available. It is very clear that this family and community are looking for answers. If you know anyone that lives in this part of Southern California, Glendale, Malibu, Calabasas, please share this video with them so we can help keep that awareness raised and show Elaine's family that there's a caring online community out here standing behind them.
And speaking of caring communities, if you're looking for a space to meet like-minded true crime enthusiasts and advocates while also engaging in ethical case discussions, look no further than the Uncovered community. We're offering all of you a special discount code for 20% off of a yearly membership with Uncovered. So when you sign up, just use the code JL20 at checkout, and this code is good until the end of the year.
And in our community, you can attend live webinars that are presented by experts. We even have a whole space completely dedicated to our series with John, where we discuss all the cases we've covered on each episode with others in the community. Regardless of whether you join our community or not, you will always have access to the Uncovered database where you can look at Elaine's case, see all the sources, the full timeline pictures, all of that good stuff. If you're not big on joining the community, but you still want to support Uncovered in another way, we also have a merch sale running until the end of the year, and you can find the link to our store in the description box below.
You can see the amazing work that they do here on LordanArts Uncovered. They're really at the forefront of pulling all this information together and trying to dilute it all in one place where people can dive into it. And obviously, I stand behind them. I think that's pretty clear. So if you guys will help support them, I would appreciate that too. Of course, back to this case, Elaine's case. This is one that clearly needs that exposure raised. We have to keep it up. She was just beginning to experience her life to the fullest. Her family clearly deserves answers. At the time of her disappearance, Elaine was around 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed 125 pounds. She's of Korean descent with naturally brown hair and brown eyes. She was last seen wearing a white sweatshirt and denim shorts, but she may have been wearing gray sweatpants. If you have any information regarding the disappearance, please contact the dedicated official tip line for Elaine's case at 1-800-551-3080. Also, if you or someone you know is at risk of self-harm, help is out there. Please reach out to the NSPH at 1-800-273-8255 for free confidential support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I know we're getting into the holidays. That's really tough for some people in particular. Know that that phone number is there for you guys. Thank you to the Park family. Find ElainePark.com, Rosemary Wheeler, Jaden Brandt, the Mysteriously Missing podcast, the To Live and Die in LA podcast, Investigation Discovery, the Danielle Hallen YouTube channel, KTLA 5 News, Los Angeles Times, CBS News, Patch, NBC4, ABC7, Crescenta Valley Weekly, the Local Voice of Malibu, The Crime Wire, NamUs, Reddit, Web Sleuths, and Wikipedia. Also, a big thank you to my friends at Uncovered.com and co-hosts on today's show, Rachel Rosalette and Andrea Cipriano. Please join us again in 2 weeks as we look into another mystery that deserves to be uncovered.